WrestleMania 23, when all was said and done in 2007, was the biggest money show in the wrestling business ever. That's changed now, of course, but still not every event is able to boast that, and when all the figures had come in, it basically made around about $46 million. In fact, it was so successful, WWE didn't even feel the need to exaggerate their attendance figure that much. They said, hey, there's around about 80,100 people in the Detroit arena, and basically there was. And we forget about it now, but 80,000 people went and watched men and women fight in their pants. It is filled with both great matches and ones that surpassed your expectations, and man, is that true when it comes to the Undertaker versus Batista for the World Heavyweight Championship. In fact, at one point, that was going to go on last. It was going to be the main event, and then WWE changed their minds, and that really pissed off Big Dave. Even in the lead up to WrestleMania, when he was doing all of his press, he told the Detroit News, I'm going to paraphrase here, I don't agree with this decision, I think it's absolutely terrible, and we are going to go out there and knock it out of the park so much, whoever has to follow us is going to have a very bad day indeed. None of that matters though, does it? In fact, you're probably wondering, why is this bald idiot going on about that when we have to address the elephant in the room? And that's because the big centerpiece of this version of WrestleMania is Donald Trump. Now, of course, there may be something going on right now as I'm saying these words, which of course is why WrestleMania 23 got voted into the retro spot this week anyway, but I don't believe you tune into these to get political opinion, so that's all I'm going to say about it. We take it, we throw it over there, and we're just going to focus on the wrestling. The big question though, of course, is how the hell did this happen? Now, of course, back in 2007, he wasn't the leader of the free world, but he was a mainstream television star and actually had a long-dated relationship with World Wrestling Entertainment going back to WrestleMania 4 and WrestleMania 5. Both of those were held in Trump Plaza because Donald thought the glitz and glam of professional wrestling could help his Atlantic City that he was trying to turn into a brand new version of Las Vegas. Also, he bought these events wholesale, so Vince McMahon was like, yeah, you can do that, because that basically meant no matter how many tickets they sold, the company was still going to make a bucket full of cash. It also meant they struck up some kind of a friendship, which is why almost 2 decades later, the idea was pushed to, hey, maybe we should bring Donald Trump back in. Now, this actually came from the mind of the USA Network's Bonnie Hammer, who has always worked with WWE, and it kind of started because of The Apprentice, which of course Donald Trump hosted, was having a bad time in the ratings. Maybe don't mention that again. The same was happening with Rosie O'Donnell's The View show, so somebody at WWE came up with this great idea to have a fake Donald Trump and a fake Rosie O'Donnell have a match on Raw, and I'm not kidding you, it is one of the worst things you will ever see in your life. Like, even if you were my mortal enemy, I will still say, do not ever view this. It absolutely sucks. Trump was so upset by this, he sent a letter to Vincent Kennedy McMahon, within the storyline, of course, and it all led to the Battle of the Billionaires that we are going to talk about. I swear, you're not going to believe any of it unless you've already seen it, but even then it's still quite a trip. Stone Cold Steve Austin, who would serve as the special guest referee in that match too, told an amazing story about how it all came together on his podcast. Now, I'm sure there's a little bit of ha he he, because it is pro wrestling and that's what we do here, we exaggerate, but apparently they were backstage at the arena. Vince McMahon called over Steve Austin and said, Steve, I think you should give a stunner to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's advisors were like, there's no way that's happening. You can't stun him, he's flipping Donald Trump. And then yes, apparently, Donald Trump said to Vince McMahon, well, do you think it's going to help the show? Vince went, yeah, pal. So the Trumpster agreed to do it. Think of that. In other news, Rey Mysterio was so badly injured, his doctors were telling him, you shouldn't ever wrestle again, Rey, which means we have to put him up a couple of notches on the Legends ladder, because how the hell did he manage to overcome that and still be good in 2020? And Kurt Angle was making moves to go into mixed martial arts. In many ways, it's a shame he didn't. I would love to have seen the Olympic gold medalist in the UFC, even though years of battling wrestling injuries probably mean he would have had his ass kicked. And with all that out the way, with the scene set, let's up those downs to WrestleMania 23. The coolest thing about the show is how it looks. Not only the set, but the sheer amount of people. I mean, flub me. Somebody told me there was around about 80,000 of them. I know it's quite commonplace now, but because of the pandemic, I forgot about all of this, so when I saw them, a little bit of water came out of my eye. It's so badass, and that is doubly true when you go into the opening video package, which focuses on WrestleMania 3, where Aretha Franklin sang America the Beautiful, and then what do we cut to here? Aretha Franklin singing America the Beautiful. I thought it was flippin' fabulous. So she must have had some affiliation with wrestling to come back and do it again. and I would have loved to have asked her, who is your favourite wrestler? I'm going to say Tyson Tomko. Kicking off the show was the Money in the Bank ladder match, and I'm just going to make this clear right now. I get why it became its own pay-per-view, but it was a mistake. I love the tradition of this kicking off WrestleMania. It just somehow made it feel so much more special, and because it is WrestleMania, deep down, somewhere in my loins, I actually think the wrestlers worked a little bit harder, because every wrestler works harder at WrestleMania. And it was Jeff Hardy versus Matt Hardy versus CM Punk versus Fit Finlay versus Mr. Kennedy versus Randy Orton versus Edge versus King Booker. I just want to touch on King Booker at the moment, because if you listen to Booker T's podcast, he's always saying Big E needs to be more serious, he needs to be less of a joke. And here, Booker T is playing the most ridiculous gimmick ever, and you know what? It is absolutely great. I don't understand that at all. I also bet that you rolled your eyes when you heard that Finlay was involved. You're probably like, oh, it's the man with the shillelagh. But do you know who does the earliest, craziest thing? It is Finlay. He just jumps off the top rope into the awaiting crowd. And again, I know we see that all the time now, but it's Finlay. He was supposed to be, I'm going to roll around, and here he's flying around. I mean, that was instantly forgotten when Edge picked up a smaller ladder and just chucked it right into CM Punk's face. And I don't want to act like their father, but what the hell are we doing? This was just metal on bone. Your skull doesn't know what's going on. The skull doesn't know, oh, I'm fake wrestling. How did he not die? From here, you remember the deal. Money in the Bank matches are just nuts, and this could be one of the most nuts of all of them, and I'm sure that's not true, but when I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, my word, it's nuts, because Jeff Hardy is jumping off the top and doing a swanton bomb with Kennedy, who's on a ladder, and then flipping out. Edge is on like the tallest ladder ever, and Randy Orton pushes him off. It takes him around about 76 years to fall off the thing, which means technically he's still falling, and the crazy spot is that Jeff Hardy climbs up an even taller ladder, and there's another ladder, how many times I've got to say ladder, between the apron and the guardrail. He lays Edge onto it and then does a leg drop from the top. If you have never seen this, you owe it to yourself to go and watch it. I honestly don't know how that wasn't the edge of the rated R superstar's career. I said Edge, the end of Edge's career. See, look how much it affected my brain. How is wrestling fake? It was pitched as such a devastating thing that Edge had to be stretchered out, and just as you were coping with that, Randy Orton hits CM Punk with an RKO from another ladder. And he lands like he's been in a flipping car wreck. And then actually, if you can believe it, King Booker had the match won, but because Charmel, his wife, had got involved, Matt Hardy had grabbed her, leaving the question to Booker, do I grab this briefcase or do I save the love of my life? Thankfully, he did pick his wife. Otherwise, can you imagine that conversation when they got home? Just in case you wanted more interference, Hornswoggle, Finlay's son, was out here, and he gets murdered too, because he's like scrambling up the ladder like he's some kind of animal, and Mr. Kennedy doesn't appreciate that at all, so he gives him a rolling fireman's carry off the ladder onto the mat below, and he must have crushed his ribs. He doesn't protect him at all. It's like having sex without a condom. This all led to the impression that Punk was going to win. He'd have to wait another 12 months before getting that little doozy, when Kennedy pushed him off and stole the Money in the Bank briefcase. One day we're just going to have to do a whole episode about Ken, because it is just a fascinating story. This was meant to lead for him having a WWE title run, and instead he got kicked out of the company after failing a drugs test and pissing off important people. It is Wrestling 101. Kennedy cut a promo after this saying that every single world champion now needs to watch their back. Again, you can see the rub he was getting, but it was not to be. I was then in tears, because this WrestleMania opens really hot. You've got the crowd, you've got an incredible first match, and then it is the Great Khali versus Kane. The Great Khali versus Kane. Talk about dragging someone back down to earth, is getting it down. And I love Kane, I really do. He is one of my favorite characters in the history of the business, but there was no way that this was gonna be that good. I mean, even Mr. Khali, who I'm going to presume is the Great Khali's dad, probably looked at this and went, well, they can't do much, and they really weren't able to. It was billed as an inter-promotional match to try and give it a little bit more heat, but that did not work. And with around about 2 minutes, the Great Khali has got himself tied up in the ropes. I was laughing my ass off, and I'm sure this was a planned spot, but it still looks so funny, just like he's a wailing goof. When this was all going on too, Kane used it as an opportunity to go and get that hook, you know, the one from the movie he'd been in called See No Evil. But wait a minute. One, if you do go back and watch this retroactive, you're like, what the flip is that? Because you weren't going to remember that film came out. And two, in the film, that was used for like ripping people's assholes open. I'm not kidding, that's what he did with it. So I was like, Is he gonna stick it up Great Khali's bum? Thankfully he didn't, but I was worried. WWE, of course, told the Big Red Machine to slam Great Khali as some kind of homage to WrestleMania 3, but you'll be shocked to hear it didn't have the same impact, and then Great Khali gave him a tree slam and picked him to the 1-2-3. I mean, it is one of the most anticlimactic finishes ever. It's like if you're having sex and you go to, finish and a toy popped out. You'd just be like, well, what the flip was that? That's kind of how I felt here. Khali then choked Kane with that hook, and it was disgusting when you remember what it was used for. I think we could forget about this for the rest of our lives. Crying time were then backstage, and this kind of hit me right in the feels, because of course Shad Gaspard tragically passed away recently, and when you remember what he did trying to save his son, and you see him here, and you remember this tag team probably should have got at least one more run within the WWE, well, it was just really sad. And it was one of those stereotypical WrestleMania backstage things they always do. They started to dance with Eugene and the ECW chicks, and their WWE words are not mine. And also, one of them is Kelly Kelly, another is Layla, and then a bunch of legends turn up, like Slick is there, Ron Simmons, Dusty Rhodes, and they just all dance away because they're so happy that it's WrestleMania, as long as they're having a good time. We then jump straight into Chris Benoit versus MVP for the United States title in the This Is the Real WrestleMania match, because they were going to be all technical and try and have a catch as can classic. This is kind of fascinating watching back now, because this was Chris Benoit trying to put MVP on the map, whereas now in 2020, MVP is just an established guy. It's kind of easy to watch now for obvious reasons, and although MVP didn't win the US title here, and he probably should, it's still a pretty hard-hitting match. MVP's entrance was also excellent because he came out with a bunch of cheerleaders, and WWE just made him look like a massive star, which made it equally hilarious where Chris Benoit came out with no one, like Billy No Mates. And you knew what the deal was going to be here instantly because they just started to pound the shit out of each other. Literally within around about 15 seconds. That's not me exaggerating like I usually do. Benoit had blood somewhere on his face just because he'd been clocked right in the skull. It is kind of silent, but the crowd do pick up when MVP does his ballin' bit, and Chris Benoit eventually wins with the diving headbutt, a move now which I never want to see again as long as I live. And yeah, like I say, I think it would have been better if MVP had won, but look, let's keep it nice and simple. It was a million times better than Kane versus the Great Khali. We then head backstage and we get our first glimpse of Donald Trump, who is sat there with a former Miss America known as Tara Connor. That made me a little bit uncomfortable, but not as comfortable as I was going to be, because he's on the phone being like, WWE sucks and Vince McMahon hasn't given me any food, I just want a sandwich, when all the lights start to go crazy, and from behind the sofa, out pops the Boogeyman. Donald sold this like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, and he told the Boogeyman to go and get him a sandwich, and as he did fly off camera, he basically laughs. Wrestling is just the oddest thing in the world. This is pretty much terrible, and yet for some reason, I watched it 5 times. I just couldn't believe it was a real thing. We then had our whole Hall of Fame awards bit, which is always nice to see, and Howard Finkel was doing the introductions. That kind of got me right here, because he hadn't been gone that long. We're not going to get into it, but these things are just great to hit you with the nostalgia gland is going to get it up. It was then time for The Undertaker versus Batista, with Big Dave coming in as the world champion. And do you want to know a little bit of a secret? At one point during this build, Batista was slated to win. Now really, that's not that surprising, because I'm sure as soon as WWE did realize, oh my gosh, he's on a streak, everybody had the conversation, is this the guy that's meant to win? And clearly he didn't, but can you imagine? Still, Big Dave and Takes were telling the truth. This is absolutely getting it up. Because despite all the naysayers assuming that this was going to be a pile of crap, I think it's The Undertaker's second best match ever at WrestleMania, if you take the ones he had with Shawn Michaels and you combine them into a pair. I mean, it is just great from the word go, and for some reason, Teddy Long is doing the introductions, just because you have to get everybody on WrestleMania. I was surprised he didn't go, I've changed the rules, player, and it's a tag team match. It stayed as singles. The Dead Man also had one of those entrances that either gives you chills or pisses you off depending on what side of the fence you fall. But it genuinely does last around about 10 minutes, but I thought it was absolutely great. Ever since I was a kid, I couldn't get enough of it, and that will probably be the way until I get so fed up with wrestling, I never watch again, apart from Undertaker entrances. As soon as the bell sounds, Batista just spears the Undertaker straight away, and that sets the scene, especially when he then climbs to the top rope and hits the Phenom with a flying shoulder tackle. And you can actually see people in the crowd going, wait a minute, this isn't what I expected at all, and they just start to get louder and louder. I mean, you can really start to smell it, you can really start to feel it, and you can really start to touch it. I mean, don't do that, because that would just be you stroking your television set. If anybody comes in the room, they'll be like, what are you doing? You have to go, well, I think the Undertaker and Batista are really surpassing expectations, and you will be kicked out of your home. Taker also big boots Batista, and it is one of the stiffest big boots I've ever seen in my life, because surely backstage they're gone, right, no one believes in us, we're just gonna lay our stuff in. But honestly, poor Batista's face, I'm amazed it didn't lose a mark. But really, this is kind of when you understand it's a chicken and egg scenario. I don't think they would have worked like this if they hadn't been so perturbed that they'd been bumped, so it needed that kind of disrespect to get to the levels that it did. Oh, it just hurt your brain. So their working boots are on, as opposed to their, I don't know, sleep boots. I never understand why people say that. Their working boots are on. Yeah, what do you think they're gonna do? Just fall on the floor and do absolutely nothing? And because this is prime Undertaker, or at least Undertaker before he'd racked up a bunch of injuries, he does that majestic dive over the top rope. And honestly, you need to watch this like David Attenborough. Like David Attenborough should commentate on it like, there's the Undertaker flying through the sky. It is one of the world's greatest sights. And he is right. Batista instantly feels like he needs to one-up him though. So as soon as he has got back up to his feet, he grabs the Undertaker, he gets on one announce table, and he running power slams him through another. It is unreal. They're back in the ring too. They kind of start to trade moves like it's an AEW match, which is incredible because these two guys are massive. And when Batista hits the Batista bomb, the near fall on that one. It is like 1, 2, and the hand gets to like hit. I mean, half a more millisecond and he would have won. Fortunately, he didn't. Because the dead man is able to avoid another one of these and he reverses it into the tombstone piledriver to not only defeat Big Dave, but to become the World Heavyweight Champion. And in his career, he never won the big titles that much, so it does feel like a big deal. And the fans certainly think so. They're losing their damn minds. It is absolutely one of the most underrated matches in WrestleMania history, meaning Batista was right. He proved us all wrong again. And then, well, just roll it. Hello, my sweets. It's Simon Miller here with another episode of Out of Context Wrestling. I will just describe the next segment to you. Given that Stephanie McMahon had just given birth, she wanted to show her brand new grandchild to her father, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Vincent Kennedy McMahon, being so inspired by this new life, knelt down by the crib when for some reason we got a camera angle from the baby's perspective. Vince McMahon then proceeded to tell this newborn child that he was going to decimate Donald Trump and probably try and kill him. Every time Stephanie McMahon, the mother, asked him to stop, Vince told his daughter to shut the hell up. I mean, why wouldn't you? Following on from that bizarreness, we then also get one of the most bizarre wrestling matches in WrestleMania history, because it is the old ECW guys taking on the new ECW guys. Imagine anybody in the late 90s had told you that was going to happen on, again, what was the most profitable wrestling show ever. It did mean that the Sandman, RVD, Tommy Dreamer, and Sabu were taking on Marcus Corvon, Matt Striker, Elijah Burke, and Kevin Thorne. And while you can get entertainment out of this, we also just have to be honest, it is a mess down. That's not because it's not fun. It is really fun, but it's fun for all the wrong reasons. Sabu kicks things off, sorry, I don't mean to be laugh, but he basically misses every single spot he tries, and by the end of this, I think every single person was injured because they were working like it was ECW from like 96, 97. There is no regard for anybody's personal safety. I mean, there is this amazing monkey flip that sends Matt Striker about halfway across the ring, and once again, you should get David Attenborough back. And of course, they're soon all hitting their big moves, because it's just one of those kind of matches. But no move is better than RVD's move, so he hits the 5-star frog splash also onto Matt Striker. Poor Matt Striker, he was just getting his ass whooped, and he's able to win it for the old guard. When that happens as well, Joey Styles, who is on commentary, pretty much creams his pants because he cannot believe that Extreme Championship Wrestling are even being focused on WrestleMania. And yeah, again, what I said earlier, I was kind of the same. They're in their old bingo halls, and now they're on the biggest stage of them all. You will not remember this as soon as it ends. And then it was our main event. I mean, it wasn't, it was the Battle of the Billionaires, but don't pretend otherwise. The whole show was centered on this clash, and the only reason WWE didn't put it last is because they thought Bobby Lashley was too green and that he wouldn't be able to handle that spot. In terms of the internal machine, they knew that this was the money maker, so they were gonna put as much into this as possible, and you just gotta call it as clear as day. It is so much fun. It is so WWE. When they get this stuff right, it just takes you on a roller coaster. it is getting it up. It is, of course, Lashley versus Umarga, with Donald Trump and Vince McMahon in their respective corners, and whichever one of these two guys loses, their representative is gonna have to have their head shaved clean. Now that kind of does ruin the match for many reasons, the two most important ones being, one, nobody cares about Umarga and Bobby Lashley here, they only care about Stone Cold Steve Austin, Vince McMahon and Donald Trump, and also, you knew the outcome. Nobody actually thought Trump was going to get his head shaved when Vince McMahon was right there. So people basically sit on their hands until it's quite clear we're building to a finish. Amado Estrada is also in the corner of Umarga, and when you kind of remember that and the presentation, this is one to file under questionable at best. But really, when you see Umarga work and you kind of see how he got this character down, he really could have been the world champion, which apparently was on the cards at one point. Unfortunately, he had a bunch of personal issues, and 2 years after this, he had passed away. It is a tragic, tragic tale. The man gets bumped off the apron at one point and he sells it like he's dead. And the antithesis to this is Donald Trump, who isn't taking the whole thing seriously at all. In fact, he just shouts the whole time, "Go get him, Bobby! Go get him, Bobby!" And he does it so awkwardly, you just know these two probably only had one conversation beforehand. That was probably just, "Hi, I'm Bobby, hi, I'm Donald," and that was it. Stone Cold Steve Austin, as I've already mentioned, is a special guest referee, but he kind of just feels like a prop here, again, just to get as much mainstream attention on this as possible. But that does work. And at one point, he takes the Samoan spike and he too sells it like he got shot with a gun. I went into dad mode again because I was like, wait a minute, doesn't he have a bad neck? He does not care here. He's all about the match. It also kind of underlined that we must have had mad plans for Umarga to allow him to do this. And really the only reason this was put in is that we could have the arrival of Shane McMahon. Now I'm just gonna introduce a brand new segment here because it happens every week, and therefore, hello, it's me, the younger version of Simon Miller, and yeah, to represent that, I've just put a wig on my head. Look, I'm running out of props, all right. But welcome to the first ever It Looks Like They Were Just Born, this week featuring Shane McMahon. Like, you can't believe it. When you see him run down to tend to his father, who has just had his ass whipped, it honestly looks like he's just popped out of the womb. I know I say this every time we do retro ups and downs, that's just age, that's just time, it's gonna happen to all of us, but it will just scare the absolute crap out of you. So yes, this week's They Look Like We're Just Born goes to Shane O'Mac. Anyway, after a lot more nonsense, Trump does look into the camera and he goes, "What is going on here?" And he says this with about the enthusiasm as a fish that's told they're about to be eaten, and then he goes and spears or attacks Vince McMahon. Is this one of the worst spears you'll ever see in your life? Yes. He follows it up with a bunch of horrible punches, but again, it absolutely works. The crowd is going nuts. And just when Umarga is about to Samoan spike Steve Austin again, he turns it around, he hits the stunner, Lashley hits the spear, they get the 1, 2, 3, and Vince McMahon about to go bald. You then get the money as McMahon desperately tries to run away, and even Shane McMahon tries to protect his old dad, but it's not good enough. He gets tied into the barber's chair, which also had its old entrance before this, and that absolutely cracked me up, as Donald Trump, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Bobby Lashley shave the CEO's head. But they do it so aggressively, and they do it so viciously, this looked like the stiffest thing in the entire match. And also, you've got to be careful with that. If you do it too much, it don't grow back. It's all great though, and it's a clip that WWE would show over and over again. And while I know this isn't breaking news, for all his goods and all his bads, and all his ups and all his downs, Vince McMahon is always game for making himself look like an absolute jabroni. And here he just sells it wonderfully. His facial reactions as if he's just been told, "Sorry Vince, we gotta put you in the ground." As the three good guys start to celebrate, it's also here where Stone Cold Steve Austin gives Donald Trump that stunner, and it is laughably bad, to the point even Steve Austin is cracking up. And the only real dent in the armor here is that everything Steve Austin does should have been given to Bobby Lashley because we were trying to get him over. But look, the Rattlesnake was one of the biggest stars ever. You know how WWE treats this. And overall, it's just an absolute laugh a minute, this is. It's WWE at its best. WWE then did that thing where they stick a filler match in between that and the real main event because they want all the fans to calm down. But all the audience knows what they're doing, so what do? They just give up and go, "Well, we'll take 5 minutes," so there's no reaction whatsoever. And yeah, it's Melina versus Ashley in a lumberjill match, but listen to what I just say. Down. Melina won with the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment, the surprise roll-up, and then because there was a bunch of women on the outside, they had a big brawl. And that was it. Which brings us to our real main event, which is Shawn Michaels taking on John Cena for the WWE title. And given that John Cena does hold on to the championship here, you could make an argument that maybe we should have switched this card around a little bit, but still, this is really, really good. up. John drives to the arena in a Mustang here, although obviously it's not him, but if it is, he should be arrested because it ends with him smashing through an arena wall and then just getting up like, oh, I'm John Cena. And Shawn Michaels has a very basic entrance, which again kind of didn't work. And I also forgot about this. Before they do lock up, some stupid moronic fan gets in the ring because they think it's all about him. Michaels thinks it's hilarious and even goes bye-bye as he leaves. But what the hell are you thinking? Don't get in the ring. This starts off really cool as well because Shawn Michaels, being the veteran, wants to have a hearty handshake and John Cena goes, no, I'm not doing that. So Shawn Michaels slaps him right around the face. Then when things have calmed down and, Shawn Michaels has got John Cena in a headlock, you can audibly hear him go, take it easy, baby, because clearly Big Match John was too wound up for his big match. I love little things like that. Makes me feel like I'm behind the curtain. Makes me feel like I'm important. The crowd was also mega into the Heartbreak Kid and they were totally against John Cena, which would be a huge sign of things to come. And the big turning point here is when Michaels runs at John Cena gets out the way, because maybe Shawn Michaels couldn't see him. Doesn't work. And then he hits the post and he busts himself open. This really is great too, and maybe a forgotten top main event at WrestleMania because you never hear anybody talk about it. And at one point they even go to the outside and Shawn Michaels gives Cena a pile driver on the steel stairs. You are not seeing that in 2020, although there are a lot of ref bumps, and you'll definitely see that a lot now. Jack Doan was also challenging Charles Robinson here for the fastest referee ever to run to the ring at WrestleMania, and it's just after John Cena has hit the FU, now known as the AA, and once again you get such a close near fall you start to maybe believe that Shawn Michaels is gonna win. Again, he's not. That happens again too after Cena got into it with an official because Shawn Michaels was able to get out of the STFU, and as soon as he turns around, he gets super kicked right in the face. And I tell you this, I 100% mean it, you could have had that be the finish and I would have bought it and I would have been fine with it. But again, this is the ascension of John Cena to the super duper top, and he kicks out as well. It's always the proper ending that gets me. It got me back then and it still gets me today. Because John Cena doesn't pin Shawn Michaels, we go one step further than that, and he relocks in the STFU, and of all people, the Heartbreak Kid taps out. I mean, this was putting Cena over big time and turning him into the force that he is today. And for that very reason, Shawn Michaels does deserve a pat on the back. Cena cried afterwards because he was just so happy, and he was about to get even happier as he entered the stratosphere. And this, my friends, is WrestleMania 23. And I tell you, if you're looking for a show that is easy from minute one to minute end and barely has a bad match, this is the one for you. I'm giving it up. And as always, we finish with Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer star ratings because people still argue about them, and that cracks me up. The ladder match got 4.25 stars. Great Khali versus Kane got -1 star. That's quite nice. Benoit versus MVP got 3.25 star. Batista versus The Undertaker, 4 stars, you bet your ass. That crazy ECW match got 2.25 stars. Bobby Lashley versus Umarga, Battle of the Billionaires, got 3 stars. Melina versus Ashley got a dud. It's not their fault. John Cena versus Shawn Michaels also got 4 stars. You see, we are all in sync. Now it's that time of the week again. People still seem to be getting confused. Don't tweet me getting all mad. Go in the comments, write what show you want us to do with Retro Ups and Downs. Whichever ones get the most upvotes, they go into the poll next week. The power is in your hands. Then like the video, share the video, subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling. Head over to whatculture.com, read yourself some articles, follow WhatCulture on Twitter, WhatCulture WWE. Watch more videos here on WhatCulture Wrestling. My name is Simon from WhatCulture. Make sure you stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon.